Point of order from the Honourable Member for King's Heads.
I'd like to seek unanimous consent to ask the member opposite a question specific on what he's talking about right now.
The Honourable Member doesn't have unanimous consent. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, I am glad that member stood up, because I know what the question he was going to ask. He was going to say when the... Oh.
Point of order, the Honourable Member for Drummond. Well, I'm a little confused. The Honourable Member just said that the next election will be on the carbon tax. But what does that even mean for Quebec? There is no carbon tax that will apply in Quebec. I'm sorry, but this is debate. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, I know the member for King's Heads was going to ask me about the monstrous Axe the Tax rally I held in his community.
Yes, he was.
That's what he was going to do. He was going to ask me about the roughly 1,000 people that crammed into that room, and boy, were there great people. If I could pay the member a compliment, he represents some great people. Yeah, they are wonderful common sense people, but Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid they're very unhappy with that member. Very unhappy indeed. And I am told that what happened is that member found out about the size of that rally and the number of people who were going, and he had a total meltdown. No. The member had a total meltdown. He would burst into tears. He called the PMO. He said, he's going to lose his seat. He told them that when he grew up, he was told that he would always be a somebody. He was going to be an important guy, and he was on the verge of losing his seat. And he called the PMO and said, if you don't give me a pause on the carbon tax, I'm going to march out of the caucus.
That's right.
He then whipped up a group of Atlantic MPs, and they marched over to the Prime Minister's office and began banging on the door and said...
Member for King's Heads on the point of order.
You seek unanimous consent to ask the member a question.
The member has no unanimous consent. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And so they were all the Atlantic MPs banging on the door. The Prime Minister was behind the door. He was in the fetal position, sucking on his thumb. He was crying his eyes out, Madam Speaker, because his Liberal MPs were threatening to walk out of caucus. Right. And so he walked out.
Member for Elmwood Transcona on a point of order.
And the leader of the Conservative Party decides to get his first job outside of politics, if he too will be a drama teacher.
Well, I couldn't even hear what the Honourable Member for Elmwood Transcona was saying, because the Honourable Member was... So I will ask him to repeat it, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sorry I wasn't loud enough the first time. I was wondering aloud if when the leader of the Conservative Party decides to get his first job outside of politics, if he'll be a...
That is not a point of order. I'm sorry. It's a point of debate. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition has 2 minutes.
Says the guy who's been living off a parliamentary paycheck since he was born because his dad was a member of Parliament, Mr. Speaker. And he still is. And so, Madam Speaker, the reality is that member from King's Heads was among those Liberal MPs banging on the door, begging the Prime Minister to relent on his carbon tax. The Prime Minister, shaking on the ground, finally agreed to relent, and out he walked to an unannounced, unscheduled press conference that wasn't even in his itinerary moments earlier, without any written materials to announce that he would put in a temporary 3-year pause, but just for some people, in regions where his poll numbers were plummeting and his caucus was revolting, and boy, were they ever revolting, Madam Speaker, and there is now that temporary pause on the carbon tax, a carve-out. He said his environment minister says there will be no more carve-outs. Well, there already have been. For example, there's no carbon tax on the industrial sector in Canada. They have a carve-out. There's no carbon tax on large cement plants or concrete factories.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. I don't know whether there's an interpretation issue, but it's really muddled. There's talk about a documentary and a carbon tax that does not apply in Quebec because it's really hard for us to understand. It's not making much sense.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Speaker, this is not a matter of language and understanding. It's just that it's hard to translate or interpret common sense for the Bloc Québécois.
Carlton can tell us if he'll be continuing so I can ask my question when he actually has the chance to re-engage on this.
Leader of the Opposition resumes his speech. And it being 5:42, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière.
Silence. The Honourable Member, l'Honourable député de...
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. I ask the unanimous consent of the House to allow the Leader of the official opposition to finish this incredible speech in which we learned so many wonderful things. Does the Honourable Member have the unanimous consent of the House? No. The Honourable Member does not have unanimous consent. Orders of the day.
The Honourable Member for York Simcoe on a point of order.
I believe if you ask again, people are so excited to hear the end of the story from the member from King's Hands. You can see.
Had no unanimous consent. Ordre du jour.
Orders of the day.
Orders of the day. Private member's business. Resuming debate on M96 Canadian